idea that human beings could in some way live on that's non-material, we say, well, that's nonsense. And part of it, as I said, is because we imagine a world that seems foolish. Mark Twain has a passage in Letters from Earth where he says, people think after they die they're going to lie on green fields and listen to harp music. He says they wouldn't want to do it for 5 minutes while they're alive, but they think they'll be happy for the rest of eternity doing it after they die. Now, I'm not suggesting to you that everybody that you speak to is going to accept this. What I'm saying is sometimes people need permission to entertain an idea. And we too often foreclose the possibility of people believing it by either not introducing it or by dismissing it. I'm not asking you to believe what you don't believe. I'm asking you not to take that belief from other people who might believe it and who might find comfort in it, by saying to them that the only immortality is the memory that people have. I actually don't believe that. And I remember I did something that I recommend to all of you who still have the opportunity. One day, a couple of years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, long before he was sick, because my father's sickness was very, he had pancreatic cancer, it was very quick. But about 5 or 6 years ago, my father and I were walking along the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia, where I grew up and where he was a rabbi. And I thought, you know, you always say you're going to ask parents these questions, and then you never do, so I'm going to ask. And just out of nowhere, I said, do you believe in life after death? I had no idea. And my father said, I can't believe that the people whom I love completely disappear. And I thought, in some ways, the statement of faith for some people is the eternity of the human being. It has less to do with God than with, can you actually look in the eyes of someone that you love and think they're just stuff? There's nothing essential, spiritual, ethereal about this person. In other words, if you believe at the heart of the world there is a mystery, not a puzzle something you can figure out, but a mystery, something that you can't know, something that can never be measured, something that can't be touched or seen, then it opens the possibility that there is more in this world than you imagine. And if you believe that there's more in this world than you imagine, which is a statement not only of faith, but of pure epistemological humility, just we don't know so much, then it is possible that in a way we don't begin to understand this isn't the only leg of the journey. And that's a more powerful opening than anything else I believe you can say. And it's one that you get from a rabbi and not a psychiatrist. That maybe this isn't all. It's possible that we are, you know, as Nabokov says at the beginning of his autobiography in this beautiful passage, that existence is a brief crack of light between two darknesses. Maybe after you die it's the same as before you're born. But life is such a surprise. Why shouldn't death be too? Maybe, in fact, it will be a remarkable, astonishing surprise. In Tukachinsky's Gesher HaChaim, which is the standard work on Jewish mourning, he mentions this possibility. He gives the analogy of twins in a womb. Right? You can find this also in Maurice Lamb's book, The Jewish Way of Death and Mourning. He mentions twins in a womb. He says, imagine that there are twins in this womb, and one of them thinks there's a life outside the womb, and the other one says, that's ridiculous. We've never experienced anything else. We've never seen anything else. How could you possibly believe that there's another life? Now he says, imagine that the one who believes is born. Back in the womb, his sibling is mourning a death. But outside, they're celebrating a birth. He says, that's what it's like when you die. It's a birth into a reality that you cannot imagine before you die. Can I tell you that it is true? No, I can't tell you. Can I tell you that it is a powerful and comforting belief? That I can tell you. Can I tell you that from my experience of human beings, I believe it? Yeah, that I can tell you too. I actually have enormous faith in you. I don't think that you disappear. I don't think any of us do. What we become, that I have no notion. But the idea that we're part of a continuum is a powerful and comforting and possibly true idea that we ought to add to our arsenal as people who deal with those who die. And maybe one day we'll discover it for ourselves. Maybe, maybe. Maybe there'll be another birth, different from this one, and maybe even more beautiful. But in the meantime, just remember that everyone who dies is not just a body. They're also a spirit. And that means they can still learn, they can still teach, and they can still entertain the possibility of a rebirth to a world that is in some way less anguished, less tragic, less sad, and less finite than this one. Thank you.
I'm Al Engelberg, and I'm the chairman of the board of Plaza Jewish Community Chapel. Thank you, Rabbi, for those really inspiring remarks. My job here this morning is to introduce Dr. Diane Meier, but before I do, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about Plaza and also to make a very important announcement. As Elisa mentioned, Plaza was established in 2001, about 9 years ago, as a not-for-profit corporation to serve the community. We have a board of directors which consists of rabbis from all the denominations, as well as Jewish communal leaders and philanthropists. Plaza was created in response to investigations by the New York City Consumer Affairs Bureau and the New York Attorney General, which after investigations established that Service Corp International, which owns Riverside, Campbell's, and many other funeral homes in Manhattan, was a monopoly, which was overcharging for Jewish funerals. So Plaza came into being with a simple mission: to eliminate the crass commercialism that had become associated with the funeral business, and to ensure that every member of our Jewish community receives a dignified burial. Over the last 9 years, we have served over 5,000 families with a caring personal service at a cost that is 40% less than the commercial funeral homes. And of course, we provide free services to those who need them, and connections to bereavement services and to educational programs such as this. We like to say, as our radio advertisement says, that we are a service and not a business. Today, I'm proud to announce that Plaza is entering a new phase in its role as a communal institution. The Board of Plaza has unanimously voted to provide a $225,000 grant to Mount Sinai School of Medicine's Brookdale Department of Geriatric and Palliative Care Medicine for an 18-month pilot program that will provide palliative care counseling to patients who have been diagnosed with end-stage kidney disease or dementia. The program will be the first to provide counsel not just from a physician who is expert in the prognosis, but also from a palliative care physician, a social worker, and a chaplain. The goal of the initiative is to provide patients and families with the expert counseling they need to understand the complex medical, ethical, family support, and spiritual issues that arise in the wake of a terminal diagnosis. For many families, a funeral is simply the last step in a lengthy process that begins with a diagnosis of serious or life-threatening illness. Families need intellectual, emotional, and spiritual support in making informed decisions at every stage of that process. Plaza was founded with the belief that there was a need for a not-for-profit institution dedicated to supporting the needs of families and communities at a time of great loss. Providing support for this innovative counseling program at Mount Sinai is an important milestone for Plaza in expanding its mission of service to this community. The selection of Mount Sinai as our grant recipient was in no small part due to our next speaker, Dr. Diane Meier. Dr. Meier is a 2008 recipient of a $500,000 MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant. This is what they said about her. Diane Meier is a geriatrician who is shaping the field of palliative care and making its benefits available to millions of Americans suffering from serious illness. While working as a geriatric physician at Mount Sinai Medical Center in New York, she recognized that modern medicine's focus on curing disease and prolonging life failed to treat the physical and psychological distress of patients in both early and advanced stages of serious illness. To fill these voids, Meier established the Hertzberg Palliative Care Institute at Mount Sinai, a model program that assists patients and families in navigating the complexity of illness and devising strategies for managing pain and other symptoms such as anxiety, depression, sleeplessness, and loss of appetite. Diane also directs the Center of Advanced Palliative Care, an organization affiliated with Mount Sinai that provides technical guidance to hospital staff, physicians, nurses, social workers, and administrators in creating, structuring, and financing new palliative care programs throughout the United States. As the aged population increases, Diane is addressing an urgent medical and social need and transforming treatment for seriously ill into more humane and effective care. Diane?
Wow, I'm sort of silenced by that introduction. Thank you so much, Al. It's a great honor to have been invited here today, and it's especially an honor to thank my friends at Plaza for your incredible foresight in recognizing that there's a long journey before the funeral that families go through, and in recognizing the connection in our community that we care for people not only in their last days or hours of life, we care for people through their whole life, and especially when they're most vulnerable, when diagnosed with a serious illness. And it's really an honor to be partnering with you in meeting the needs of our community. So on behalf of all of us at Mount Sinai, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I want to begin by just telling you a little bit about myself. I am a geriatrician, as Al said, meaning I specialize in medical care of older people. And my very first job after my training was to come to Mount Sinai and work for Bob Butler, who is a geriatrician and established the very first freestanding department of geriatrics in the United States. So from the beginning of my career, I've been a hospital-based physician, clinician, teacher, researcher, but almost all of my work took place in a hospital. And as time went on, I became more and more distressed about what I was seeing in the hospital. With the best of intentions, a lot of the things we were doing seemed to cause more pain and suffering than not. And yet there seemed to be only one motivating impulse in my hospital and in many others, and it was to prolong life as long as humanly possible, regardless of what that life was like. And as a consequence of witnessing this year after year and becoming more and more frustrated with what I was seeing and feeling that it was less and less why I went to medical school and what I had hoped to accomplish in being a physician, my boss, I'll never forget this, I had, I think, a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old at the time, and so the thought of writing another grant proposal was not at the top of my list. My boss, Bob Butler, said to me, there's this new project called the Project on Death in America, and you really have to apply to be one of these faculty scholars. I said, Bob, I don't have time. I got these kids, I got this other grant I got to do. Forget it, I can't do it. He said, Diane, I never tell you what to do. And it's true, he had never told me what to do, probably because he thought that might not work real well. He had never told me. He said, but this time I'm telling you what to do. You must apply for this. So because he wasn't given to insisting, I did what he said. So lesson number one is listen to your mentors. I applied to the Project on Death in America Faculty Scholars Program, which was a great honor. I and a team of colleagues received this grant and became part of a group of physicians primarily, but also nurses across the country who wanted to do something about the quality of care for the seriously ill. And what was so powerful about this is that each of us were pretty much alone in our own settings. This was back in the middle 90s. That is, we felt isolated, we felt marginalized. In some ways, we felt that we were swimming against the tide of the cultures in which we were working. But in this group, we were among peers. And it's also interesting that in the middle 90s, you may not even remember, this is just when email was beginning. And in fact, one of the requirements of becoming a faculty scholar was that you had to get on email. And I thought, oh, this is ridiculous, just another time sink, Last thing that I need is for people to be able to reach me at any time, But it was a requirement because it was a way to keep these far-flung scholars linked and communicating, and it was incredibly powerful. And I would say that the people that I met that year are now not only my colleagues, they are also the leaders across the country in the field of palliative care, and they're family to me and live as far away as other countries, San Diego, Boston, all over the place. So I want to acknowledge the importance of community in the development of this field and in bringing me to whatever successes I and my colleagues have had. I'm going to actually make use of some slides, mainly to show you some photographs of one of my patients, but also to help draw a contrast between one way of delivering care and another. But before I do, I want to find out who's in the audience. Are there any health professionals in the audience? Anybody here who has cared for a loved one when they died? Most people. How many people have a family member who died in a hospital? So the majority. How about hospice? Okay, slightly fewer. Nursing home? Okay, so that's fascinating because that's actually the national statistics. 50% of us die in hospitals, about 25% of us in nursing homes, and the remainder at home. So more than 3/4 in an institution. Where do 90% of people say they want to be when they die? Yeah. So we have a ways to go. Can I ask for help getting the first slide up? Thank you. This set of slides is called A Tale of Two Patients, and they're both patients of mine, and I'm very honored, thank you, to introduce to you the husband of one of my patients, George Schwartz. George, you want to just raise your hand or stand up? So you'll learn a little bit about George and his wife Judy and their daughter Sarah in what I'm about to present, and then I'm going to actually ask George to come up, and I'm going to ask him some questions about what things were like for him and Judy in their last several years. So this is one of my patients who I took care of for about 15 years in my geriatrics practice, Elaine G., a 92-year-old nursing home resident. She ended up in the nursing home for the last couple years of her life, but before that had been home, with dementia and repeated pneumonias. Now her care was business as usual, and I'll take responsibility for failing to help her and her family get on a different path. But she had had 4 or 5 admissions for repeated pneumonia because when you have dementia, there's brain failure, and you actually forget how to swallow. I think if you think about swallowing, how complicated it is, how many muscles have to be coordinated to get the food or the liquid to the back of the throat and then coordinate the actual swallowing. It's a very complex set of motor functions, and as dementia gets worse, you actually forget how to swallow. The result of that is that mouth secretion, saliva, ends up in the lungs. And saliva is full of bacteria, so people get pneumonia after pneumonia after pneumonia. And treatment of the pneumonia does not prevent that process from happening the next time. She never was willing to talk about her wishes. I tried. She was unwilling to appoint a healthcare proxy. She was unwilling to talk about what kind of care she wanted, when and if she got sicker, believing, as she said, that talking about it would invite it in. So her son called 911 every time she developed pneumonia, and this time she was unable to breathe on her own, and a breathing machine was put in her lungs, and she was admitted to the intensive care unit, where she remained for 3 months before she died. She ended up having a surgical procedure to put a breathing tube in her trachea. That's called a tracheotomy. She had a tube put in her stomach to feed her because we weren't able to get enough nutrition in by mouth. Her kidneys failed from the infection. She was on dialysis. And then she was on medicine to keep her blood pressure up. I think she had about 10 drips going. She was on 3 or 4 different machines, prolonging her life. Repeated infections acquired in the intensive care unit, so one infection after another, many needle sticks, many procedures. A lot of pain, restlessness, confusion. Whenever she was not deeply sedated, she was moaning, and her son suffering, if anything, more than she, with a great deal of guilt, anger at me, anger at the rest of the team, anger at his mother, really not knowing what to do to be a good son, unable to speak on her behalf, in part because she never would give him that authority, and in part because she never talked about what she wanted, so he didn't know, and in part because I think he was angry at her in life as well. So it was quite complicated. She eventually died in the intensive care unit after about 30 minutes of a resuscitation effort. Now, I wish I could tell you this is unusual. Unfortunately, it is not unusual, and when you read about the healthcare cost crisis in the newspaper, this is what it is. Okay, so this is business as usual unless families, patients, physicians, nurses do something to prevent that. This is the default path. And that is a photo that Mrs. G allowed me to take on an earlier hospital stay, and that her son gave me permission to use. Now, this is another patient's tale. This is Judy. George is her husband. He's here with us today. She was diagnosed with lung cancer around in her late 50s, no prior history of smoking. So there are many people with lung cancer who don't deserve it and didn't do anything that caused it. She was told at the time of diagnosis that she had around a year to live. She had a superb oncologist at NYU, actually, a different medical center, who actually, with his creativity and wisdom and commitment, gave her 6 years. So she outlived her prognosis enormously. Interestingly, despite this really superb, exemplary care she received from him, there were some things she felt she wasn't getting. And being a very intelligent, capable, initiative-taking person, she found me somehow on the internet. I don't even know how she found me. George will tell us. And called and asked for an appointment at a different medical center. You know, that's really radical. So she came to see me primarily because she wanted to get control over what might come in the future, I would say, more than because of anything pressing at that moment, as I recall. Is that right, George? Yeah. But she wanted to make sure that if she had pain or other distressing symptoms, that she had a go-to person who would be very responsive and know how to handle that. And sort of to talk about and thus gain control over what the future might hold. And for quite a while, I and her oncologist worked together to take care of her. That is, he was continuing to treat her cancer, and he and I were both taking care of her and her family. And we talked on the phone a lot, and we emailed a lot, he and I, the oncologist and I. There came a point, actually not very long before she died, when it became clear that the chemotherapy was causing essentially more harm than good, causing more weakness, infection risk, nerve injury than it was helping her, and she made a decision to stop. And we'll talk in a little bit about what happened between me and her oncologist at that time. And then she made the decision to opt for hospice, and she only got hospice for a very short period, only a few weeks, because continued life-prolonging treatment was helping her up until that point. So she was getting both life-prolonging chemotherapy and, I would argue, life-prolonging palliative care at the same time. That's Judy, very beautiful woman, full of life. Was a member of 3 different book groups, read everything, just like the rabbi was always quoting from great authors, and really impressive. That's Judy's daughter, Sarah, who's going to get married at the end of August. And that is George and Judy and Sarah. And all these photos were taken when Judy was sick. And this is one of my favorite New Yorker cartoons, a doctor saying to a patient, "There's no easy way I can tell you this, so I'm sending you to someone who can." Okay, now, the New Yorker probably thought this was not a great doctor, right? Because he's not having what we call the conversation with the patient. Those of us in palliative medicine think this is a great doctor. He knows what he's good at. And like Judy's oncologist, he was really good at what he did. Not so good at what to do when the chemo was no longer effective, but recognized that that was also an important part of comprehensive care of patients with advanced illness, and was able and willing to work with colleagues who could meet some of those other needs. So this is the old model. This is what Mrs. G got, only she didn't get the hospice part. You either get life-prolonging care or you get hospice care. You never get both. Right? Now, this is how I was trained. It's either do everything or do nothing. Nothing meaning hospice. Or what we do when there's nothing more that we can do. That's a statement I used to hear often in the hospital. Doctors saying to families, "There's nothing more that we can do for your mother." Think about it. What does that make the family feel like? What would a family say in response to that? Do everything. Of course I want you to do everything. Because who wants their loved one to be abandoned by the human community? And of course, palliative care is everything, and it's very aggressive everything. So this is the model that we are promulgating now, where you see that from the point of diagnosis on the left there, and throughout the course of an illness, people get both. They get life-prolonging treatment and they get palliative treatment, until the point at which the life-prolonging treatment causes more harm than good or is no longer working. And that's the point at which referral to hospice occurs, as in Judy's case, only the last few weeks of her life, because she was continuing to benefit from life-prolonging treatment right up almost to the end. So this is Judy at home on hospice. She got a hospital bed in her living room, and George and Sarah and a hospice team and Judy's endless parade of loving friends and family and me, and actually her oncologist, all came to see her at home. It was interesting because I had to call her oncologist a couple times to get him to go to the house, and he couldn't. He said, "Why is that necessary? Why does she need me?" So interesting. And I said, "Because she loves you and she's grateful to you and she wants to express her thanks and appreciation." And he actually went, and I think that was the first time that he visited one of his patients who was dying at home, and he also came to the funeral, which was at Plaza. All right. So what are the lessons from these two people? First of all, we don't know who's at the end of life till really very close to the end. Days weeks sometimes, particularly in non-cancer diagnosis like dementia or end-stage kidney disease. People look exactly the same 2 days before they die as they did 2 years before they die. It is impossible to predict. Therefore, if you think you need to be able to predict in order to access palliative care, most people who need it will never get it. Do you guys know what percentage of us die of cancer in this country? Any guesses? 23%, 1 out of 4.